So thank you everyone for joining in. I am Ramona Arora and I'll be moderating today's event. So today we'll be speaking with the Pagels-Minor. And before we start, I just want to give a brief introduction about what is Products by Women. And so it's just a diverse global community network for women in innovation, tech, and beyond. The network offers women the opportunity to connect and learn from peers from around the world, find jobs beyond borders, and also get matched with recruiters and mentors to accelerate their career. We know it's all been virtual for a while, but thankfully in our case, it has actually expanded and we've grown across US, Canada, India, Singapore, Amsterdam, UK, and there's more to come. So a little bit about what's coming up next after this. If anyone's interested, we're having a Futures Tech Festival that's going to be happening on 26th and 27th of September. It's going to be a 2-day online global future tech festival. You can participate in it to just kind of learn from emerging technology panels, join in the recruitment sessions, and during break time, obviously enjoy some musical performances. So it's going to be an entirely free event. You can register on the link, which is thefuturetechfestival.com, and get enrolled with us. We really look forward to seeing you there. And if you want to enroll in more events, you can also visit our website. We're also having a speaker interest form out right now. So if you want to moderate an event or just be a person who wants to speak at an event, feel free to kind of fill out that form. I'll be sharing this PDF on our chat in a bit, and also join our Slack channel because that's the way you can get to talk to me a lot, but also other people if you find me annoying. There are other people who are really fun. So now I know you're not here to like hear me speak a lot. You're obviously here to talk to B. Pagels-Minor, who's our speaker for today. So about B. Pagels-Minor. They're from Mississippi and they've been to Chicago, to Silicon Valley. B. Pagels-Minor has built their career around building great products for amazing brands while also working to enrich their community around them. B is a native of Mississippi who relocated to the Silicon Valley in 2018 from Chicago. B is an enthusiast for anything technology related as well as randomly obscure trivia facts. I love that. B works in the tech industry and spends too much time scouring the latest financial, footwear, and technology news for new tech toys and shoes for their collection. So welcome, B. We're so lucky to have you join us in this event.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm happy to join all of you as well, virtually, of course, but the good thing is I'm seeing all your faces and you guys look great. You look very healthy, which I'm very happy about. That means you're doing all the appropriate things and good stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm glad everyone has starting to have their video on. So, more of you, feel free to switch on your videos. So the first question, which is obviously just, to get to know from you about how did you start your journey into data and product management, and just how did you end up here with us at this panel?
Yeah, so I always tell people like it's very interesting because when I got into product management, especially being based in Chicago, it was still a pretty young field of business, right? So when I actually started out in tech, I started out in tech support and I worked for a small tech startup in Chicago called Carousel, which has now been acquired by AWIN and a very large global marketing company. And what was really interesting about that work is that what naturally kind of came out of the work is I would get all these, calls from customers saying, your product doesn't work the way I want it to work. Excuse me. This is why you always keep water right next to you when you speak. But it's like your product doesn't work like we want it to work, and it needs to be fixed. And so what ended up happening is I started collecting that information. And then when I presented it to our CTO, just being like, let's build these things, he was just like, have you ever do you know what this means? And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, this is like product management. Like this is what they do. Like they figure out what customers want and then they make suggestions. And so then from that point on, so this was about 2012. like 2011, 2012, I actually started, investigating and learning about product management and actually doing a lot of self-taught type things. So for instance, I would look at like Marty Kagan's website and things like that, where they're like kind of the experts in product were at the time, to kind of get a sense of what they thought were the best practices. And then from then on, I've basically done product since then. So like I went from that company, did the traditional like business analyst at a company, and then went from business analyst to an associate product manager and then product manager, et cetera. Now, how does that relate to data? Because my title now is a senior data product manager. First of all, this is a weird title, right? Because it's definitely not something that exists in most companies. Netflix happens to be a unique entity because they have such a huge data science and engineering infrastructure. So it became apparent to them that like they could use some of that product management skill set within the data sector as well. And so really now my current products are data products. And so these are the data products that the company actually uses to make various decisions around, let's say, how many members we think we're going to have, or our financial data and things like that. So it's a little bit of a different thing. I actually call it probably is closest to like a infrastructure PM at some companies. So the teams that like, build a lot of the admin systems and things like that. The difference is that it's a little bit more sophisticated in terms of like, we have to be thinking future, we have to think about how to future proof and improve these things because, we're dealing with larger data sets than most companies will ever even contemplate, right? So it's like, so it becomes like this, like a little bit of this like engineering feats time strategy aspect of things. And Ramona, it looks like you're muted.
Oh,
There we go.
oh, that's right. Okay. No, I'm like, thank you for sharing that with us. You're absolutely right. When it's about large data set, there's so much that you talk about infrastructure in that because you have to always be focused on that as well because that's such a big part of the job itself. So, while you worked as a product manager in many companies, and what is it that really inspired you to keep working or keep going ahead? Even when you faced any kind of failures, what is it that kept you going? Like, even kind of like with the technology changing quite a bit every now and then, how did you keep up with it and just kept going?
Yeah, so it's funny, and I'm wearing a shirt that says, love first, right? Like, I legitimately love delighting customers, right? Delighting stakeholders, solving problems, right? And so, like, even when it feels hard, like, so for instance, I've worked at like really small startups where the teams are so small that it feels like it takes 6 months to do things that now, especially working in very large corporations that have tens of thousands of employees, it like when we decide to build something at like like Apple where I was before or Netflix now, like it really just takes just a little bit of time, right? And when you're in startups, you're just like, man, like it feels like you never like things would never get done. Or for instance, if you wanted to A/B test something, it would take so long to get an A/B test to be significant so that you could actually make a decision. And so it would be very frustrating. But the thing is that it doesn't feel as much like a problem when you know that you're still trying to get to the key point of like figuring out exactly how to solve that problem for your end user, right? And so that's the thing that always has driven me is like that desire to create something that's really, really great that solves a problem, right? And then once you solve that problem, the other cool thing about that is that your company becomes more successful, right? So one of the things I always think about as a product manager is that, there's even at the smallest companies, there's still thousands or even millions of people who rely on you, right? So if you think about everyone who works at a company, so if only 100 people work at that company, even still, like those people probably support one or two or three or four or five people. And then you start thinking about your customers and how much they need your product, and you're like, oh, I am responsible for these thousands or millions of people and like their overall happiness and their overall success in life. And so when you start thinking about your impact and how it kind of has this like these degrees of like impact that you don't even necessarily realize, it becomes very exciting, right? It's like, I help my customer, and then it also helps the people that I work with and the people that rely on them. And that's something really very, very powerful.
That sounds empowering right around the corner as well when you're telling me about it. Like, it does sound like very impactful. And I guess that's why, especially at Products by Women, there are a lot of like aspiring product managers around here. What would you say were like some skills that, really helped you start, I guess? Like, I know you went from analytics to product management and just kind of
Yeah.
understanding.
So first and foremost, so there's like the soft skills, right? So like communication, so really shoring up your communication. And the thing is that the easiest way to shore up communication though is actually by being confident, like feeling like you can lead. So like I definitely suggest investing in yourself, so finding mentors, reading about how other great leaders, accomplish what they accomplish, because that's going to help you feel more confident as you speak to these things. The other thing about being a product manager is that you don't actually build the things, right? So like technically you will never be more of an expert on how to engineer something than an engineer, right? You won't ever be more of an expert on how to build an algorithm than like a data scientist who builds the algorithm. So all you really can do is be very curious, right? And so when you're very curious, what that means is that even though I don't do those things, I do study about those things, right? Like, so I want to know what the latest technologies are, why those things, why one would be better than another one. Like one, I was reading like, why do you use Hive versus Spark, right? So, because that's something that comes up at my company. And, being able to, at the very least, at a high level, understand like how those things work so that you can be a really great consultant, right? Because to a certain extent, product managers, I feel like are consultants, which is why so many management consultants become product managers, is that you're kind of looking at the big picture. You're doing a deep dive on all the different aspects of the problem, and you're coming up with those problem statements and then working to figure out how to create solutions that are sustainable and scalable to, counteract those problems, right? And so like, you have to have like that level of rigor around your work product, right? Like, things that I think about, I have a higher level of follow through than just about anybody. But it's not because I actually want to follow through, because if it was left up to me, like I honestly am not a person who follows through. But because I understand what I need to deliver on, it becomes really easy to like really hold myself accountable. So for instance, if I say I'm going to schedule a meeting, that meeting's going to get scheduled today. If I say I'm going to create a one pager, that one pager, at least the skeleton for that one pager is going to get started today so I can start getting feedback. And it's about having that level of commitment and follow through, because the other thing, when you're, especially because you're kind of this consultant and you're not executing on the actual building of these things, it becomes so much more important for you to be very well organized so that you can continue to kind of, get everyone on the same page and continue to kind of be that advocate and that person who can kind of see the bigger picture. And the last part of it, I always say is that this is kind of weird, especially I think this is something that just kind of come out of my career. So especially as my career has kind of progressed, I've worked way more with non-males as product managers than I have with, like males. And so I've also like had like this like idea that's kind of like you kind of parent, like it's like we're moms, right? And so like as a mom, you're like, the kid doesn't want to clean up their room, right? Like, so this is like tech debt, right? So like you're like, why have you not been like telling me about the tech? Why have we not been thinking about the tech debt? Why have we like what not been doing those things? So it's also about like having that like spidey sense of like what BS is out there, right? Because you're always going to have folks who, depending on what they're interested in, they may not be interested in the exact thing that needs to be done to make the product successful, right? A great example was tech debt. Like for instance, there was a company that I worked at, and they had so much tech debt, and they built their system so poorly because they just didn't expect the product to expand or be as successful as it ended up being. And so as a result of that, we were basically blocked from advancing the product in any way. And so we had to make this like revolutionary decision to just stop and rebuild the entire tech stack from the bottoms up on a more modern tech stack. And the reality of that, though, is that the engineering teams were just like, this is going to be so hard. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. But as a product person and, the other product team, we had to be like, well, the thing is, we're going to lose business and eventually we're going to get phased out of our entire, sector if we don't take this opportunity to level up our product. And so it's also like being able to be like that, like very like, this is gonna get done. Like I understand how you feel that way, but I'm the parent here. I'm the adult in the room, and this is the thing we have to do to be able to be successful. And being able to like actually just have that type of backbone, despite the fact that you'll have a lot of pushback from a lot of different areas.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you for walking us through that in detail. I feel like a lot of the times the focus is on, oh, what technology do I need to know? But the main focus, I feel like when it comes to product management, is so much in the soft skills, because you're not solely doing a job. You're actually the collaborator between so many other functions and teams that are working around. So thank you for kind of walking through us through that and giving us examples also while you did that. So
Mhm.
okay, so I'm gonna just like dive deep into it a bit more, and like, what was one of the most interesting product feature that you actually worked on, if you remember it? You know.
Well, there's a lot. So it's actually so funny because that's one of the things that sucks about like my last few roles is that there's like NDAs, so I can't tell you about the really sexy stuff, the stuff that like honestly like it's really cool, I'm not gonna lie. However, some stuff that I can talk about. So actually, one of the things that I worked on a little bit earlier in my career, which turns out to be like one of the simplest things I feel like I ever worked on, but it was actually like one of those like aha moments. So when I was at cars.com, cars.com, basically the entire business model is that cars gets paid basically to be in advertising mode for dealerships and also major car companies, so like Honda, Ford, and things like that. And so what we figured out, and I was the product manager for both the early shopping tools and buyer personalization. And so what we figured out is that the number one indicator that someone would actually kind of follow through and submit a lead, which is where like that was the end result. So they would pay us just to advertise, but the really end result is that they wanted to generate leads to actually, get them into a car dealership to actually buy that car. And so the number one indicator for that was actually to compare cars, right? So like being able to kind of save and compare cars, that was a leading indicator that someone would actually do a lead and then that lead would convert into a sale. And so obviously the higher we can get that comparison rate, the more money we would make for our partners and more money we would make. And so as a part of that, we started going through all these different examples. And I was just like, well, it's really hard to actually save a car, right? And so when we did like user studies, people would have like 30, 40, 50 tabs open and they were trying to go back and forth to like remember like this Honda had this one, this other Honda had this other one. And so I was a part of the team that kind of was like, well, what if we had a shopping cart? You know, Amazon has shopping carts and you can compare there. Best Buy has it, all these other places. And the first idea was, well, it's cars though. Like, how do you compare cars? Like, what attributes do you have to compare cars on cars? But the reality is, it becomes very simple, right? Like, people want to know what color the car is, what year the car is, how much the car is, how many miles it is, and like just a high level of what features it has. And so, like, our team is the team that implemented the actual if you go to cars.com, you put in any type of car, it'll give you the entire product page with all the different cars from like within a certain distance. And now you can actually click each of those different cars and compare up to 4 cars at once. And then you can also save cars directly from there. And that particular project is like we did like a 200, 300% increase on comparisons. And so as a result, it led to like a 20 or 30% increase in leads or something like that. And so it was a huge, huge mover.
Wow, a 20 to 30% is such a big deal. And actually, it makes sense. Like you said, like, also doesn't sound simple to me, but like, it's definitely like a concept which a lot of people would probably want. But how do you translate that user interest into the website on the platform? That's really cool, B, that you actually implemented that. So, one of the things that I want to tell the audience when I was actually talking to B was B did mention to me, which really struck me, was something that, product management and development is something that's obviously very close to B and their career, but they also would love to talk about, something that a lot of us face, I think, as women especially, is the struggles that we go through. Like, we want to know what actually happens, when someone becomes a leader, what actually inspired them to do it, what were the struggles that they went through. So, B, you can you talk to us about what were some of your proudest moments and struggles that you faced as someone who's Black in the tech industry, but also identifies as LGBTQ?
Yeah. So first and foremost, so my actual gender identity, so I identify as trans non-binary lesbian, which means that my pronouns are they, them. But the reality is when I walk into a room, the first thing someone says is that's a woman, a Black woman at that, right? And so like that's kind of the lens that I know that people see me through. And I will say that, again, as my career has progressed, I've been very fortunate to work with more and more women, right? But when I first started out, like I was almost always the only woman on most of my teams. And I was also almost always the only Black person on most of my teams. And so I will definitely say that, and I was also the only gay person on most of my teams. So I was always like the one that had these different things. And I will tell you that it was very difficult. And I would also say that I'm very fortunate in my personality. Like I'm a super extrovert and I'm super confident. Okay, so I'm going to try to talk from the lens of if you're not that person, right? Because I think that that's very important to talk about, especially folks who are introverted or more quiet leaders, right? And so that's actually a challenge in and of itself. Like my manager and I were talking about recently how we're very just like we don't like that there's like a bias towards people who are loud, right? Because that actually is something that exists in the world, is that louder people usually are considered to be powerful, when in reality they just can be talking BS, right? But people just listen to that. So starting out my career, especially, it was surprising to me, especially because I think I come from a non-technical background, how much I would get questioned. And I would get questioned about really weird stuff. Like I legitimately have people on my team that if I said the sky was blue, they would be like, no, it's green, right? That's how contrary they would be in systems, in situations, even in meetings. Like, and I got to the point where I started kind of putting an onus of other people. And so what I call that is actually, I tried to find champions, right? So people who I could work to have deep connections and relationships to, who were whatever the majority percentage of people were. So for instance, if my team was mostly men, I would try to find a team that, you know, a team member who I trusted and I could have a great relationship with, who was a man. And so when we were in a space or a room and I would say something and like that team member might like contradict me or try to ignore me, I charged that person with saying the same thing I said again, and then saying, by the way, B said that, right? And then all of a sudden the entire room would kind of circle about like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Can continue on your different idea. And so the thing about that is that it also, because like the people I generally chose as champions were more senior to me or managers, it started pointing out to them the bias that was happening, right? Like even though I was doing my job, I was doing my due diligence, all of my suggestions and everything was based on facts and data and user input, I was being undermined consistently in my role by various people on my team. And so what's also great about that is that it became on them to start coaching those people. Because let's be truthful, that's actually a lawsuit. Like if I got fired or something because of what was happening, I had a great case of saying I've done everything in my power to be successful at this company, but that I'm being mistreated, and that's why, you know, I'm leaving this company. So it was like legitimately a lawsuit, and it was really great because like it didn't come from a place of emotion, right? So one thing that I always tried to do is I tried to document, like, one, again, my follow through is like next level, right? Because my follow through was so next level, I always had proof that I had done all this research, all these different educational things to prove that I was an excellent product manager, right? So you have to be good at what you do first, but then after that, I then took on those partners. Now, secondly, what's really interesting in my career is that I have found that even in situations where I am not the only one, where I do have other people who may look like me or who are women or who are LGBTQ, I've still had some issues, right? And one of the things that I found, especially let's say with like our older generation, right? Like, so let's say like the 50 plus, like women, 50 plus, LGBTQ plus, they often have absorbed some of those bad habits that come from those communities that often undermine people who are minorities. And so I actually had a specific incident at Cars, for instance, where a female leader, a senior director, someone who could really help my career, told me specifically that by being non-binary, that she didn't think I was going to be very successful at Cars. She said, you know, you're trying to be too different. And I remember thinking to myself, and this is right after a diversity event where Cars was like, come meet B, our perfect example of diversity. And then she told me, you're too diverse. It was just like, it was a very, very weird, like irrational conversation. But it was like that. It was another moment for me where I was just like, okay, the thing is that I'm going to have to coach up, right? You know, like a lot of times, you know, as a product manager, we're kind of told to kind of like manage like your stakeholders and your peers and your engineering teams, but you also have to remember that you're constantly coaching up, especially for the simple fact that you could be at a company where like the CEO is really great dude who's great at sales, or great dude or great lady who's great at sales or marketing or something like that, but they're not actually great at understanding why the product needs to exist in the way that the product exists. And so one of the best skills that you can ever learn is how to coach people up. And that includes bad habits or irrational habits and things like that, and kind of continuing to educate them. And something that I actually do now whenever I first enter a company, regardless of whether I think that they have some experience with it, I often provide documentation about like the common issues that face Black women who work in the workplace, the common issues that face trans folks, the common issues that face, lesbians, because I want them to understand that I'm coming in with these experiences. Like I've been treated in these ways. And so I want you to know that this is things that could happen and to start proactively being able to identify those different things. Like, so for instance, I was in a meeting the other day and I was misgendered, and the person who misgendered me immediately messaged me. And what's funny is I messaged my manager. I was like, so obviously you messaged her, told her that she misgendered me. And he was like, yeah, because I don't let people misgender you, right? But that's because we have a relationship where we've established what we want what we want my experience to look like at my company, and then we collaborate together. And again, though, but that's coaching up. Like and that's also about creating the right boundaries, right? So one of the things that's most difficult about being a product manager is that, one, you might honestly be the only product manager at the company, right? So like there will be no one else who has your role. There will be no one else who really understands the kind of unique position you're going to be in, where you're a leader regardless of whether your title indicates you're a leader, because of like the level of sophistication and ownership you have of different parts of the business. And so because of that, like you have like this outsized impact on the business, and that means that you should be able to create boundaries about what the successful business looks like. So something I've been constantly thinking about as I've gotten older in my career is that a company is basically just another product, right? Like, so we own individual products, but your larger company is just a large conglomeration of a bunch of different products. And you can be a part, as a product manager, think about like very logically about what makes successful companies. And if your company is not doing those types of things, it's kind of your responsibility to point that out and say, look at these best practices of some of the best businesses in the world. We're not doing that. We could probably be more successful if we started adopting some of these ideas. And that includes like those DEI efforts. Like, I think about retention. Like Ramona and I were talking before this about how I got to spend a decent amount of time today talking to people who are interested in working at my company, and how I'm empowered to do that because I want, like, the whole idea is that we want them to know that like very diverse, amazing people work at this company. We're going to honor you. We're going to respect you. We care about like your entire onboarding experience. I never got to do that at other companies. And I'm going to be truthful, some of my other companies are not nearly as successful. And when I think about it, I think it's because they're not investing their time and energy in making sure that all of these different aspects are covered so they can retain and also attract the best talent.
Actually,
Ramona, it looks like there you go.
oh, I think it delays my, as soon as I unmute it, it takes like a minute for it to like kind of get in mute.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, this was really helpful because I feel like, a lot of the times, the events can be centered around a lot of things. And, with B, we definitely really wanted to focus on something which for me describes B really well, is authenticity. Like, be yourself is something I also saw on,
Mm-hmm.
your blog, a part of your blog yesterday, but also something that's like stand up for yourself, but in the right ways, which is like documentation. One thing that
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning definitely from this is documenting a lot of stuff, because, a lot of the times you are told things in a very condescending way, and it's important to kind of document that and connect with different mentors, and your mentors can be your managers as well. B, just like the last question, because I do want to leave time for Q&A as well, is what are your opinions on mentorship, and any advice? You have this platform right now to share your thoughts with individuals. You've actually been doing that really well, but what are your thoughts on mentorship, and what would you like to tell all these other females who are on this call right now?
Yeah, so I'm kind of weird, right? Because I don't mind mentors, but I actually think that you need teachers and advocates, right? I think we overuse the term mentor because, like, for instance, there's people that I would say I'm a mentor to, but it's a very passive relationship, right? So when they reach out to me, I'll say, I'm always available to them, or like, my mentors, like, they're available to me, but they're really people who are just kind of like consultants. Whereas I think teachers and advocates are very action oriented. roles that you need in your life. So teachers are people like, instead of just saying, oh, like product management is great, these are some books to read, they're the people who would say, read these books, then put some time on my calendar in a week and let's talk about these different books and how you're going to create a plan to get into product management, right? That's a very different relationship. And it's also a different, very different accountability relationship. And so accountability is a huge, huge, huge thing in order to be successful in anything. And the thing is, a teacher can also be your peer, right? So for instance, if you are a young person trying to get into product management and you also know someone else who's also trying to get into product management, the two of you can teach each other different aspects of this, right? And then hold each other accountable. And then you need advocates. And so that's what I mentioned before, like, having people in the room that who will advocate for you, but then also having people outside of those rooms. So people who will go and advocate for you to get promoted, advocate for you to get different projects and responsibilities. You need that. So mentors are cool. And I definitely, it's fine to have a mentor, but I really lean more towards like having teachers and advocates because that's really how you level up, right? Because that's the type of action oriented accountability mechanisms that you need, I think, to really become very successful in what you do.
That is definitely such a great point. I feel like I've never heard that statement before, but that makes so much sense. I feel like, you can give resources to other people, but do you have the time to spend with them and walk them through some of the questions or problems that they're facing? Because a lot of the times we have questions, but we don't know who's going to answer those questions. And definitely peer mentorship or just, having your friends and cheerleaders who are there to support you through this journey is such a great way to think about it. I do want to leave time for Q&A, so feel free to shoot questions here or unmute yourself and ask anything that you would like.
Hi, B, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes, thanks for your great sharing. And from what you just shared, I found your job is actually very close to user experience designer. But I don't know, for Netflix, maybe it's a really big team. So I don't know how you work together because I often heard other UI designers like talk about they often get into the fight with product manager. So I don't know how this situation is, and because your personality and the way you communicate, I feel it will be a great opportunity to know how to work together with product manager. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's actually really interesting because at Netflix I don't have to as much because my products are so internal facing, but at like Apple and all my other companies, I've definitely had that relationship. So I'm a little bit different. So I'm not a product manager that tries to control people, right? Like my thought process is we hire experts and I expect experts to do expert work on what they do. And then I'm just really a consultant who will provide direction or provide feedback. However, that relationship that you mentioned does exist between some designers and product people. And that's usually when I feel like people conflate roles, right? Like, so I've worked with like product managers who were designers, and I felt like they often put way too much emphasis on what they thought the designer should do. Whereas a designer at the time was like probably more of a subject matter expert on what the best designs are based on them keeping in the loop. And so I've definitely suggested to people to again respect people. Like why would you hire someone in a role if they can't do it, right? Now obviously there's situations where someone probably isn't the right designer for a team. But again, the response to that is to say, it looks like we made a mistake, but it's not to like kind of denigrate or be disrespectful to that person. And so I love like just providing like a generic one pager spec of like my vision with like some examples. For instance, like a great example is that shopping cart. So like I put in like all the different shopping cart examples that I thought worked well, and the types of pieces of data that I thought might need to be included. But in terms of the actual design, I left it completely up to my product designer to come up with the best solution because they were the expert on how cards.com users actually interacted with our website.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to ask any questions. Like, don't think of it as very intimidating at all. Just go ahead.
Or is everyone just excited about the Monica versus Brandy versus later? Because I'm very excited about that.
actually, B, if I may ask you a question, thank you so much for all of your perspective and insight on what you do. It's been really great. I've been very grateful to hear your perspective. I'm curious if you have any recommendations on, or first of all, if Netflix has an apprenticeship program. Like, do you have opportunities for people who are career switchers, or, and this is not for my own ability to apply, but just understanding what the infrastructure is at Netflix and your teams. Do you have apprenticeships? Since you talk so well about mentoring and what that means, I was curious if you have any recommendations on areas to look to if you will become a mentor for someone, or perhaps any practices that you do in mentoring or being a mentor to an apprentice.
Yeah, so first and foremost, Netflix is all over the place. It's really interesting, right? Because every org has the ability to kind of set their own practices. So for instance, like DSC, which is what I'm a part of, they do have interns, right? And the interns are all levels. So it's like, you know, there's people from undergrad, grad school, there's people outside of grad school. And I know the content teams also have very diverse, different experiences as well. I do know that there's like some experiments around like codifying that and making it more consistent over time. However, I know that that's still kind of, it's actually really interesting because even though Netflix is so large and so like well understood and well thought of, I mean, they're still growing, right? Compared to like an Apple where I was, you know, which, you know, had 150,000 employees, like Netflix is still running into issues that this is the very first time they've ever thought about it. Whereas Apple's like, after 150,000, which actually after, I think it's something like, there's been like at least 500,000 Apple employees over time. So they've basically had every scenario. So I think that there's still a lot of growing pains at Netflix in terms of figuring out exactly how that will do all those different things. And I also should say that from an ERG perspective, so like Black at Transtar, women at Netflix, like we're very interested in helping figure that out because we know that the folks that look like us and think like us and have our backgrounds, they don't necessarily have the same exact story, right, to get themselves in the right position. So we want to create lots of different avenues to allow, you know, us to get in there because that's kind of our focus from a, like I said, from a full, like every ERG basically has like at least one initiative like that we're working on. In terms of like mentorship programs and things like that, it's all over the place. But the thing is that products by women and groups like that are usually good places to start. Like for instance, I actually did go ahead and join a Slack group because I figured, you know, it'll be a good place for myself and other people who are senior to be able to see some of those questions and also start thinking about that. Like, so some of the things I've seen in there, I hadn't necessarily thought about because it didn't come up in my career, but now I'm thinking about it and being like, okay, so if I were to deal with that, how can I actually answer that and be supportive of someone who has that question the next time? And there's like a lot of really interesting groups. So there's like Our Collective in the Bay Area, which is actually there's Manager Leaders of Tomorrow and Our Collective, which are both Black groups. But I don't know if there's like also women's groups and things like that. I just happen to keep getting asked about a lot of Black and LGBTQ groups. So I'm not as aware of like just women-centered groups as I should be, honestly. So good. See, you asked me a question. Now I have to go and do studying on this. But there's all these like just generic groups that I think exist that have some kind of mentorship capacity to it. And I know that a lot of people like me, as we're trying to figure out how to kind of be impactful, we're starting to join those different groups. And so I would just kind of do like a search first for local groups, right? Because you definitely want the ones that are most local to you, because those people are probably going to be most engaged because potentially once it's safe, right, they can actually have coffee with you, things like that. And then kind of go from there to like the more national groups because there's also different opportunities with those as well. And then we have a question here. So which resources do you use to stay up to date on technology? And are there any great books you recommend for product management? So first on my website, so that's bpagels-minor.com/product. It's kind of like my go-to product resources. So those are the ones that I always reference throughout my career. So those are definitely the ones that I first and foremost recommend. Then I like books by like Nir Eyal and Marty Kagan. You know, just like the kind of standard books that they often get recommended. And then in terms of resources, to be truthful, I love Medium, right? So Medium, there's like so many tech blogs. Netflix has one, Apple has one. And what's really great about that is that a lot of the stuff that is going on that like people are building, there are no actual like books on them yet, right? Because like they're legitimately building new technology as we speak. And so it's really good to kind of follow the like kind of the avant-garde tech companies, tech blogs. So for instance, like also Google's is really good too. I've heard mixed signals about Facebook's tech blog, but like those are really great examples because all of those companies are building new technology. For instance, Netflix has released Iceberg, which is for the public, and it's to do large scale data sources. And so like they literally built that because, you know, Netflix needed it for their company, right? So it's like, you know, so it's really good to look at those. And then also, it's really good to follow people that you think are doing a good job. So for instance, like I love to look at those lists, there's like the top 25 product managers or like the top 50, you know, people doing great things in product. And then I usually follow them. So like I'll follow them on Twitter, I'll follow them on LinkedIn, I'll follow them on Facebook. And so when they post the articles they like, I read those articles. The good thing about the thing about product management is that sometimes it's not about being the biggest innovator. It's about looking at what's out there and kind of taking all those different things in and thinking, well, heck, I could probably improve that if I thought about it this way, right? And so like that's the really fascinating thing about like product is, you know, to a certain extent, you know, all of the best tricks have kind of been done, right? So what you're really looking at is like, who the heck did it the best? And let me figure out how they did it. And let me try to figure out how I can get some of those attributes into my personality, into my skill set.